The Adventures of Pinocchio. Once upon a time, there was an old and kind-hearted carpenter named Geppetto. He lived alone in a small, humble cottage and spent each day in solitude. One day, he chose a piece of wood and carved it into the shape of a little boy. The old carpenter named the little puppet Pinocchio. As Geppetto looked at his finely crafted puppet, he thought to himself,
"If only you were a real boy, then I wouldn't be so lonely anymore."
At that moment, a beautiful fairy heard his wish and decided to help him. That night, a blue light pierced through the darkness, and the fairy appeared beside Pinocchio. The fairy softly said,
"Pinocchio, you will now gain life. But remember, only through honesty, courage, and kindness will you become a real boy."
The fairy waved her magic wand, and Pinocchio immediately came to life. He blinked his eyes, surprised to find that he was no longer just a wooden puppet, but a living one. The next morning, Pinocchio happily shouted, "Dad! Dad!" Geppetto saw that Pinocchio could not only talk but also walk. He was so excited that he hugged him. In that moment, Geppetto was no longer lonely, because he finally had his own son. In order for Pinocchio to go to school, Geppetto sold his only coat and bought a textbook for him. As Geppetto handed the book to Pinocchio, he reminded him,
"Make sure to study hard, and not get distracted by playing."
However, on his way to school, Pinocchio was drawn to a lively puppet show. Curious, he moved closer, his eyes shining with excitement.
Wow! These puppets can actually move.
Pinocchio forgot his father's advice. To watch the performance, he even sold his textbook. Pinocchio stayed there for a few days, having so much fun that he completely forgot his father was waiting for him at home. When the owner of the puppet show found out about Pinocchio's situation, he gave him 5 gold coins and said,
"Your father must be really worried. Take this money and go back to him."
On the way home, Pinocchio met the cunning fox and the cat. They heard the sound of gold coins coming from Pinocchio's pocket and guessed that there were coins inside. The fox had a wicked idea and walked towards Pinocchio with a big smile.
"I hear the sound of gold coins in your pocket. You can bury them in the miracle field where the soil is magical. The coins will grow into a tree and you'll have an endless supply of gold coins,"
the fox said with a smile. After hearing this, although Pinocchio felt a bit uneasy because "miracle field" sounded strange and even made him a little suspicious, the fox's words were so enticing that he found it hard to resist. Pinocchio couldn't help but believe the fox and followed them into the forest. As soon as they entered the forest, the fox and the cat turned vicious and threatened Pinocchio with handing over his gold coins. Pinocchio quickly hid the coins in his mouth. The fox and the cat searched everywhere, but they couldn't find them. Furious, they tied him up and hung him from a tree. He hung there helplessly, swaying slightly, unsure of what to do. Just then, the fairy appeared. She asked gently,
"Pinocchio, what happened?"
However, out of shame, Pinocchio didn't tell her the truth. He hurriedly lied, saying,
"I just took the wrong path."
Unexpectedly, as soon as he told the lie, his nose began to grow longer at an astonishing speed. Pinocchio stared in horror, his eyes wide open, and asked frantically,
"What's happening? Why is my nose growing so long?"
The fairy pointed at Pinocchio's nose and said firmly,
"Because I cast a spell on your nose. Every time you lie, it will grow longer."
Pinocchio covered his face, tears streaming down like rain, and pleaded,
"I'm sorry. I'll never lie again.
Seeing his sincere repentance, the fairy waved her magic wand, restoring Pinocchio's nose to its original state and sending him back home. However, Pinocchio's adventure was far from over. One day, he met a mischievous little boy named Lampwick. Lampwick excitedly told Pinocchio about the land of toys. Pinocchio asked curiously,
What is the land of toys?
Lampwick's eyes widened in surprise as he exclaimed,
Don't you know? There's no school, no homework, just playing games and eating delicious food every day.
Hearing this, Pinocchio's eyes immediately lit up. He couldn't wait to visit this joyful place. Thus, he and Lampwick went to the land of toys, where they played happily and nearly lost track of time. After a while, Pinocchio began to feel hungry and grabbed a cookie, devouring it eagerly. Not long after, he was shocked to find that his ears and tail had become furry. He looked down in horror and cried,
What happened? I've turned into a donkey.
Lampwick had also turned into a donkey, and the other children in the land of toys had turned into donkeys as well. They looked helplessly at each other, filled with deep fear. These children, now donkeys, were sold to the circus by the villains of the land of toys and lived miserable lives. In the circus, Pinocchio endured countless torments. One day, he was sold to a merchant by the circus owner due to an injury. The merchant, intending to remove the donkey's skin from Pinocchio, threw him into the sea, hoping to drown him. As Pinocchio sank into the water, little fish swam over and gnawed off all the donkey's skin from his body, restoring him to his original appearance. Pinocchio struggled desperately on the rough seas. Suddenly, he was swallowed by a giant whale. Inside the dark belly of the whale, Pinocchio trembled, not knowing what to do. As he looked around, a faint sound came from a distance. He peered closely and saw that it was Geppetto.
Dad.
Pinocchio rushed forward and tightly embraced Geppetto. The two cried in the dark, and Geppetto choked up as he said,
I missed you so much, Pinocchio. I couldn't find you anywhere, so I set out to sea, to look for you, never expecting to be swallowed by a whale.
After they cried, Geppetto wiped his tears and said with concern,
But now, how are we going to escape?
Pinocchio thought for a moment and said,
We can make the whale sneeze.
Pinocchio gathered some wood from the whale's belly and started a fire. The smoke quickly spread, and the whale couldn't help sneezing. With the whale's powerful sneeze, Pinocchio and Geppetto were ejected and successfully escaped. After returning home, Pinocchio began to study diligently, becoming more honest and kind, and began to take care of the elderly Geppetto. One night, the fairy appeared again, and this time she smiled at Pinocchio and said,
You are a brave, honest, and kind child. Now, I will use magic to turn you into a real boy.
The fairy waved her magic wand, and Pinocchio's body slowly changed, becoming soft and warm, with real human skin. He was no longer a puppet but a real little boy.
Dad, I'm a real boy now.
Pinocchio exclaimed happily as he hugged Geppetto. In that moment, tears welled up in Geppetto's eyes as he gently said,
You are my good child.
This story teaches us that true freedom is not about doing whatever we please. Instead, it's about learning to distinguish right from wrong and making wise choices. Only those who are honest, brave, and kind can truly have freedom, live their true lives, and earn the respect of others. The story ends here. Good night.